Hello everyone, welcome to Pete CD Vinyl World. Today I wanted to do a ranking of a band that I guess not too many people talk about or do a ranking of because they only have really 4 albums. And that's White Lion, who are considered, I guess, a hair metal band. They came out, first album came out in '85 on a independent label, and then went to Atlantic Records and released Pride, I believe in like '87. That's when they got pretty big. So they released 3 albums. After that, they actually have a 5th album that's called Returns of the Pride, and that came out in 2008. But it's basically just Mike Tramp, the singer, and a bunch of other guys. I've listened to it on YouTube, and it's not bad. It's actually kind of heavy in spots, but I'm not going to include it in these because it's not really considered like a White Lion album. Most people don't consider it anyway. Anyway, White Lion, kind of different than a lot of the other hair metal bands. One, because they're from the East Coast. They're like a Brooklyn, Staten Island band. So they got big there first. Popular in New Jersey also. I remember hearing them originally on 89.5, which is Seton Hall's local college station, which played hard rock and metal. And they would play the song Broken Heart from their first album regularly. So I was aware of them before they hit the national stage or whatever. But they had more of an edge than, say, some of those LA bands. They, the singer or whatever looked like a guy from the hair metal band. But the other guys, they were kind of like not great looking guys. So they weren't like the typical hair metal band. They didn't wear makeup and all that. They had the teased out hair or whatever, but they had a rougher edge. Vito Bratta, considered one of the best guitar players from that era. He didn't really have a real process sound. He had more of a natural, just straight through a Marshall sound. He did do a lot of tapping, but he did it in like sort of a melodic way. Always tapped in sort of like major keys as opposed to Eddie Van Halen, who did a lot of minor key stuff when he was tapping. But he had this like really raw tone, and he was like Eddie, where you could tell there was, on most songs, there were only like one guitar track. So he would play his little licks here and there, and there was no rhythm guitar underneath. It wasn't like this wall of produced guitars like other bands had at the time. So they were pretty much like a production-wise, more of a straight-ahead band than most of the others. So anyway, let's begin. Like I said, there's 4 albums we're going to rank here, but before we begin, please hit the like and subscribe button. So coming in at number 4 is their 3rd album, Big Game. So this one came out in '89, sort of like the tail end of the whole hair metal thing. And this is after Pride, which was a huge album. The problem with this album is it's their most, like, I would say, overly produced album. Sort of that raw sound of the first 2 albums is gone on here. The first 4 songs are pretty good. Going Home Tonight, Dirty Woman, Little Fighter, which was their first video from this, which is a pretty decent song. And Broken Home. But then like the middle of the album, Baby Be Mine, Living on the Edge, Let's Get Crazy, Don't Say It's Over. Those songs are just like, almost like, mid-tempo, don't really go anywhere. But then the last couple, like tracks 9 and 10, If My Mind Is Evil, real good heavy song. Kind of sounds like something from Fight to Survive, their first album. And then number 10 is their cover of Radar Love, which also was a pretty big MTV hit. And this definitely sounds like it was recorded either earlier or at another time, because it has like their early raw sound. And it's definitely one of the best covers, from this era. Definitely one of those covers where it's better than the original. And then the album ends on another mid-tempo, boring song, Cry for Freedom. So overall, half this album is really good. Nuno Bettencourt was playing those Steinberger guitars during this era, so he doesn't have his great tone that he had in the first couple albums. So that's why I'm not crazy about it. Also, the playing is kind of straight ahead. Like, he's not doing that improvised little licks here and there. So another reason I'm putting it down lower, as my lowest ranking. Album was, I guess, okay. I think it went gold, but wasn't like a huge success because they should have released Radar Love first as the first single instead of Little Fighter. And it probably would have been a much bigger album. Coming in at number 3 is their last album, Main Attraction. I believe this came out in 91. Right? Yeah. So this is sort of back to a more heavy, raw sound of their first 2 albums. There's actually more in common with their first album. First song, Lights and Thunder, is a real heavy song. Wouldn't think it's like from a hair metal band at all. Again, this is 91, so 91, 92, a lot of these bands had their last album on a major label, so this was it for them. Second track is Broken Heart. They redid the Broken Heart song from their original album. It's not as good, obviously. When bands redo their own songs, rarely are they better than the original. Leave Me Alone's a pretty good song. Number 4 is Love Don't Come Easy. That was the first hit or release off of here. Got some MTV airplay, but it was kind of lightweight, not indicative of this album at all. It would have fitted more on Big Game, actually. I think that's probably the big mistake on here. It's like you redid your big hit from your first album, Broken Heart, but you should have released that first as a single. Or Lights and Thunder. That would have been a good single. Then 2 like sappy ballads, You're All I Need, It's Over. It's kind of like War Song's pretty good. She's Got Everything, Till Death Do Us Part, Out With the Boys. The second half of the album really drags for me. Blue Mondays is weird. Not weird, but it's an instrumental tribute to Stevie Ray Vaughan. You know, it really doesn't fit on this album. I understand why they did it, but shouldn't have really been put on this album. They should have did, like a instrumental that fit Vito's style more, like something like a Sach Boogie or something like that. Farewell to You's an okay song that ends the album. But this is a pretty heavy album, actually. If you heard the first song, Lights and Thunder, you wouldn't think it was from a hair metal band at all. But yeah, it's definitely in that era what I call no frills metal, where it's sort of like the post hair metal before grunge. Like, metal was already leading in that direction anyway, and I think these guys were going that way as well if they had stayed together. But I don't think the album did that well. Obviously, didn't go gold or anything, so they broke up after a tour of Japan, I think, for this. And Vito Bratta basically has not been heard of since. He's done a couple interviews here and there, but yeah, he claims he had some kind of wrist injury or something, and then he claims he was taking care of his mother and blah blah blah, but he hasn't come back at all. Mike Tramp has done a few things. I think he had a band called Freak Show, which had a couple albums, and he's done like sort of like this Mike Tramp's White Lion thing for the last more than 20 years, and mentioned that they did record an album just under the White Lion name. James Lamento, he's been Megadeth's bass player, believe it or not, for the past on and off for a while. So a lot of people don't realize that. Coming in at number 3, and I think a lot of people are going to be surprised that I'm putting this at number 2 instead of number 1. That's their debut, Fight to Survive. Like I said, I've heard a lot of these songs before they were big when this album was just released in 1985. Broken Heart, Cherokee, Fight to Survive, All the Fallen Men, Kid of a Thousand Faces. This album does not sound like hair metal at all, really. It's much heavier. I wouldn't say it's straight ahead metal, but it's just there. Definitely not glam or anything like that. It's on a independent label called Grand Slam out of New Jersey. I'm assuming this has been re-released at some point. The funny thing is, when I first heard Broken Heart and some of these other songs on the radio, I actually thought the singer was a female. And that's part of the reason I'm putting it at number 2. Mike's Tramp's vocals get a little on my nerves on this album because they're so feminine. And I definitely thought Broken Heart was sung by a female, and some of the others. Even the cover, you weren't really sure if that's a female or not, you know. And believe it or not, I guess maybe it was before he joined the band, and Greg D'Angelo is listed here as, James Lomenzo is listed here as bass. But actually who played bass on the album is Felix Robinson from Angel, which is kind of a neat tidbit there. That's about all I could say about this album. This is sort of like one of the great mid-'80s metal albums, if you haven't heard it. Even, I think, fans of regular metal, not hair metal, would be a fan of this. And number 1, I'm going with their second album, Atlantic Records debut, Pride. To me, this is definitely pretty solid album all the way through. I don't think there's any weak tracks on here, except I'm not a big fan of When the Children Cry. Every band at this point had to have a ballad, and they did it in a full-on acoustic ballad to end the album, and it was a pretty big hit. Of course, Wait was on here. That was their big MTV debut. But the guitar's on here. If you're a guitar fan and you're not really a fan of this music, you should still check this out because the Vito Bratta is just ripping on here. He's probably my favorite of the Eddie Van Halen clones, if that is a term. Produced by Michael Wagner, who did a lot of bands that did hair metal bands at this time or whatever. Yeah, so like I said, I'm not a huge fan of this genre. I'm kind of picky, just like most of the other genres I listen to. But White Lion is one of those bands I've always been a fan of. So let me know your order of their 4 albums, and if you like these videos, please subscribe. I'll talk to you later. Thanks.